In a world of cold, polished surfaces, the fire of rebellion is the only thing that can break the mirror of deception. Join us as we tell the stories of those who dared to defy the system and rewrite their own future. Hit subscribe now and join the cinematic revolution today.
The glass was sitting right in front of me, and my mother's hand closed over my wrist before I could reach it. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, this long, steady look that I hadn't seen since I was 9 years old and about to touch a hot stove. Then she leaned across the corner of the table, close enough that her hair brushed my shoulder, and pressed a small folded square of paper into my palm. I felt my stomach drop before I even opened it. The dining room was loud. My sister Britt had 30 people crammed into her house for the engagement party. Aunts, college friends, co-workers, neighbors who'd known us since we were kids running through sprinklers in the backyard. My future brother-in-law Corey was at the other end of the table, laughing at something my uncle said, refilling wine glasses with the easy confidence of a man who had already decided he owned the room. Everyone loved him. That was the thing. Everyone absolutely loved Corey. I unfolded the note in my lap. Don't drink from your glass. Find a way to pour it out. Don't ask me why right now. Please. I read it twice. Then I looked up at my mother. She was already looking away, back at her plate, like nothing had happened. My first thought was that she'd lost her mind. We were at an engagement party. There were little paper lanterns strung across the patio and a cheese board the size of a coffee table and a playlist that Britton had spent 3 weeks curating. My glass was filled with sparkling rosé from a bottle that had been opened in front of 20 people. What was she talking about? But my mother has never in her life been dramatic. She's the woman who drove herself to the ER with a broken wrist because she didn't want to bother anyone. She once found a wasp nest behind the dryer and just quietly dealt with it herself. She does not pass notes at parties. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood at the sink for a full minute, running cold water over my hands, trying to talk myself into a logical explanation. Maybe she'd seen something fall into my glass. Maybe there was a chip in the rim. I was looking for reasons that didn't require me to take the note seriously, because taking it seriously meant something I wasn't ready to think about yet. I came back out and found a moment when no one was watching, or at least no one was watching me, and I swapped my full glass with an empty one that had been abandoned at the end of the table. Then I moved the full glass to the back corner of the sideboard behind a vase of white peonies, and then I spent the next 20 minutes pretending everything was fine. Corey gave a toast. He talked about the first time he met my sister, how he knew immediately, how she made him want to be better. He cried a little, or did something that looked enough like crying, and Britt laughed and pressed her face into his shoulder, and everyone clapped. I clapped too. I watched my mother across the table. She smiled at the right moments. She lifted her glass. She was so good at this, at being present in the surface of things while something else moved underneath. I caught her eye once. She gave me the smallest nod. I didn't know what I was nodding back to. It was my Aunt Patricia who drank from the glass I'd left on the sideboard. She was reaching around the peonies for her own drink, which she thought she'd left there, and she picked up the wrong one. I was watching from across the room, and I saw it happen, and I didn't move fast enough. I didn't even understand what I was seeing until she'd already taken 2 long sips. She made a face, barely noticeable, just a small tightening around her eyes, and set the glass down. 15 minutes later, she was in the kitchen asking for water, saying she felt a little off, probably just tired from the drive. 20 minutes after that, she was sitting on the back porch steps with her head between her knees, and someone was calling her name in a tone that made the whole party go quiet. I found my mother in the hallway, away from everyone else. She already had her phone in her hand. Mom. My voice came out strange. What did you see? She looked up, and for a second she just looked exhausted. This tired, certain exhaustion, like she'd been carrying the weight of something she hadn't been allowed to put down yet. I saw him, she said, before the toast. He was standing behind you, and I watched him take something out of his jacket pocket. A small bottle. He poured something into your glass. I felt the floor shift under me a little. You're sure? I was watching him, she said. I've been watching him for 6 months. There are moments where your whole understanding of a situation reorganizes itself in a few seconds, like a snow globe being shaken and resettled. I had liked Corey. I had genuinely liked him. He brought my sister coffee when she was studying for her CPA exam. He remembered my birthday. He once spent 40 minutes helping my mother's neighbor get her car unstuck from the ice and refused to take any money for it. I had built an entire picture of who he was, and now I was watching that picture peel off the wall. "What do you mean you've been watching him for 6 months?" I said. She pulled me further down the hallway, away from the kitchen noise. "Do you remember in March when Britt told you she was investing in that real estate venture? The one Corey found?" I remembered. Britt had mentioned it once, briefly, and I'd thought it sounded vague but hadn't pushed. She was an adult. She had her CPA license. She knew more about money than I did. "I looked into the company," my mother said. "The filing address was a UPS store in Tempe. The managing partner didn't have a license. When I tried to find financial disclosures, there weren't any. I couldn't find a single real asset." She paused. "Britt put in $80,000. The hallway felt smaller. 80. I stopped. "When?" "February. Before I found any of this. By the time I started asking questions, the money was already in." She pressed her lips together. "I've been trying to figure out what to do ever since. I didn't want to tell Britt without being completely sure, because I knew what it would mean for the engagement, and I didn't want to be wrong about that. I kept looking for another explanation. And the bottle tonight." "There is no other explanation," she said quietly. Outside, someone was telling my aunt to breathe slowly. Someone else was on the phone with 911. "I want to tell you that I acted quickly and decisively and knew exactly what to do. I didn't. I stood in that hallway for probably 30 seconds, just looking at my mother, trying to absorb the fact that the man my sister was going to marry had just put something into my drink at his own engagement party, and that my mother had been sitting on this for months, alone, trying to protect us both without blowing up the life my sister had built around a man who was apparently capable of this. "We have to call the police," I said. "I know," she said. "I already am." When I came back into the main room, Corey was standing near the patio doors with his arms crossed, watching the commotion around my aunt with an expression I could only describe as calculating. Not worried, calculating, like he was running numbers on something. He looked up when I walked in, and for just a moment, half a second, maybe less, something shifted in his face. Then the easy smile came back. "Hey," he said, "is your aunt okay? Does she need anything?" "She's going to be fine," I said, and I held his gaze just a beat longer than I normally would have, long enough for something to pass between us. The smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. The police arrived 9 minutes later. My mother met them at the door and spoke to them quietly for a few minutes, while the rest of the party hovered in a confused, worried cluster on the patio. A detective came in and walked the room, and I watched him make note of the glass I'd moved to the sideboard. It was still there, behind the peonies, most of its contents still in it. They asked Corey to step outside. I watched my sister's face during all of this. She stood very still near the kitchen island, her engagement ring catching the light, and she watched Corey walk out with the detective with the expression of someone who is receiving information that their body hasn't agreed to process yet. Britton is 2 years older than me. She has always been the one with the plan. The 5-year plan, the spreadsheet, the contingency budget. She was the responsible one, the one who had everything in order. And I watched her stand in her own kitchen at her own engagement party while the man she'd said yes to walked outside with a detective. And I saw all of that order dissolve in real time. I went and stood next to her. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. She didn't look at me. "Mom knew," she said. It wasn't a question. She was trying to make sure, I said. "How long?" 6 months. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want to see the glass." I brought her over to the sideboard. The detective had already bagged the glass as evidence, but I told her where it had been, what my mother had seen, what had happened with Aunt Patricia. Britt listened to all of it, without interrupting, the way she always has, absorbing everything, processing it, waiting until she had the full picture before she said anything. When I finished, she said, "The money is gone, isn't it?" We don't know that yet, I said. She looked at me. Probably, I said. She nodded once, slowly, and then she looked out through the patio doors at where Corey was standing with the detective, and I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do before. Not fall apart, exactly, but reorganize. Like she was taking inventory, like she was figuring out what was left after you removed something large. Corey was arrested that night. Not only for what had happened with the drink, the lab results would come back later, confirming the presence of a sedative that would have been enough to make me very sick, or worse, depending on how much he'd intended to use, but also in connection with a fraud investigation that, as it turned out, had been open for 8 months. There were other victims, other women, other people who had trusted him with their savings and walked away with nothing. My mother gave her statement to the police at the kitchen table while the rest of the party quietly gathered jackets and said hushed goodbyes. She was calm and completely precise, the way she always is. She had dates. She had screenshots. She had a folder on her phone with every piece of documentation she'd collected since March. 6 months of quiet, careful watching, while she ate Sunday dinners with this man and passed him the salad and asked about his work and gave absolutely nothing away. I asked her later, when it was just the two of us in the kitchen after everyone had gone, why she hadn't told me sooner. She was washing dishes. She didn't stop. Because I wasn't sure until tonight, she said. And I didn't want you carrying it if I was wrong. I didn't want either of you carrying it. You carried it alone for 6 months. That's different. How is that different? She set a dish in the drying rack and turned around, and she looked at me with the expression she always has when she's about to say something she considers very obvious. Because I'm your mother, she said. I've thought about that a lot since then. There were a lot of hard months after that night. Britt had to go through the legal process, the financial recovery process, which was long and expensive and ultimately got her back about 60 cents on the dollar through a combination of the fraud investigation and a civil suit her lawyer recommended. She had to tell people. She had to field the questions and the sympathy and the opinions, which were plentiful and not always kind. She had to take the ring back to the jewelry store. She had to change the name on the lease. She was angry for a while, at Corey, obviously, but also at herself, and a little bit, I think, at my mother, for knowing and waiting, even though she understood why. That anger worked itself out over time, the way anger usually does when there's nothing left to aim it at. What stayed, though, what I don't think either of us will ever fully put down, is the image of my mother at that dinner table, watching a man she already didn't trust lean behind her daughter and pour something into a glass, and instead of shouting, instead of causing a scene, instead of doing the thing that any other person might have done in that moment, she quietly reached for a scrap of paper and wrote 6 words. 6 words, and she handed me the only way out she could find. Aunt Patricia recovered fully. The sedative metabolized and left no lasting effects, and she spent 2 weeks telling everyone she knew about the engagement party in a tone that made it sound more like an adventure than anything else. She is 71 years old and completely indestructible, and I am so grateful for that. Britt is doing okay. Better than okay, actually, most days. She took a job in Phoenix that she'd turned down when she thought she was staying for Corey, and she has a small apartment she's decorated exactly the way she wants it, and a group of friends who take her hiking on weekends. She calls my mother every Sunday. She called more often in the beginning when it was harder, but now she calls because she wants to, which feels like a different and more important thing. My mother still lives in the same house. She still makes the same Sunday roast she's been making since we were kids. She still moves quietly through her days, noticing things, carrying things, handling things, without drawing attention to any of it. I think about that night sometimes when I'm at a party or a dinner or any room where I'm surrounded by people I think I know. I think about all the things that are happening in any given room that nobody is talking about, the calculations being run, the exits being mapped, the small, careful watching that some people do so naturally and so invisibly that you forget it's happening at all. And I think about my mother, who had been watching longer than any of us, who had been carrying what she knew so that none of us had to, and who at the exact right moment found the only way to protect me that didn't require her to say a word out loud. She pressed a note into my hand and she looked away and she trusted me to understand. I did. I keep coming back to the image of my mother sitting at that table, smiling at the right moments, lifting her glass, passing the appetizers, while carrying 6 months of knowledge that would have broken most people in half. What Corey did wasn't an accident or a moment of weakness. It was a pattern. There were other people before my sister, other savings accounts emptied, other lives quietly dismantled by a man who had figured out that charm is the most effective cover there is. He didn't choose Britt randomly. He chose her because she was careful and competent and trusting, and he knew that those qualities in the right hands look a lot like vulnerability. That's the thing about people who operate the way he did. They don't target weakness. They target goodness, because goodness tends not to suspect. My mother suspected. Not because she was cynical or looking for reasons to dislike him, but because she paid attention. She watched the small things, the way he redirected questions about his work, the vagueness of the business he described so fluently, the filing address that turned out to be a UPS store. She didn't react from emotion. She built a case, quietly, over months, without telling anyone, because she understood that an accusation without evidence wouldn't protect her daughters. It would only warn him. That kind of thinking, patient, precise, unwilling to act before the moment is right, that's not instinct. That's a discipline she built over a lifetime of paying attention to what actually matters. Britt lost $80,000. She lost a future she had planned in detail. She lost the version of herself that had trusted completely and been wrong. Those are real losses, and I don't want to paper over them with tidy conclusions. The recovery was hard and slow, and some days it still is. But I watched her take every single piece of that wreckage and make a decision about what to do with it. She didn't disappear into it. She got a lawyer. She cooperated with the investigation. She took the job in Phoenix she put on hold. She built something new from the foundation up, which is harder than building on top of what already exists, and she did it without pretending it wasn't hard. That kind of strength doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from deciding over and over again that what happened to you is not the last word on who you are. I think about what would have happened if my mother had said nothing. If she'd decided it wasn't her place, or that she might be wrong, or that the cost of being right was too high. I think about the glass I almost picked up. I think about my aunt on the back porch steps, and how much worse it could have been. What protected us that night wasn't luck. It was my mother's integrity, her refusal to look away from something uncomfortable just because looking at it directly would cost her something. It was her judgment, which she trusted even when she had no one to confirm it. And it was her willingness to act, quietly and precisely at the exact moment when acting mattered. Those 3 things together. The honesty to see clearly, the judgment to understand what you're seeing, and the will to do something about it even when it's hard. I think that's what it actually looks like when someone protects the people they love. Not loudly, not dramatically. 6 words on a folded piece of paper, passed under the noise of a party by a woman who had been watching for months and waiting for the right moment. That was enough. It was more than enough.